And with that, I'd like to welcome our special guest today. So Liz Peetz, VP of Government Affairs for the Colorado Association of Realtors. There has been a lot of legislative activity and lots of things going on. So she has been a busy gal, she and her team. So she is going to give us an update. And as always, thank you so much for your time and expertise. And joining her is Jill Cox, and we'll let them take it away. And please add any questions that you have into the Q&A box, and we will tackle those after the presentation. So thanks again for joining, and Liz, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, everybody. It's really fun to be in front of you. So we're going to cover past, present, and future today. So my past list is a little long because it includes legislative session.
Yeah, buckle up.
Yeah, and all our COVID advocacy, all 2 legislative sessions, because we kind of had 2, one from January to March, and then one from May to the end of June, and very different. So when I talk about the first section of January to March, pretty typical legislative session, you know, on our way to getting over 700 bills, but in terms of bills that we worked on in the real estate industry, one of the early bills that we were able to modify one and kill the other was a short-term rental bill. So Senate Bill 109 would have quadrupled property taxes overnight by changing whenever you have a short-term rental, it becomes then commercial instead of residential, even though you operate it out of your home. Don't get me started on whether or not that is constitutional and whether it creates problems for all our localities. The answer is maybe yes and yes. But so we were happy to see Senate Bill 109 die in committee, but there was also another sort of related bill, House Bill 1093, which gives counties the authority to regulate short-term rentals. So cities already have this, counties did not. And what we did was narrow the bill, because originally it was regulate all businesses, which I think we can all agree is way too broad. But we narrowed it to short-term rentals, and really that they can't go after the property classification change. It would really be tied into simple regulations such as, if you live in a community where there's snow in the winter, how do you remove your snow? Or maybe how to put away your trash so bears don't get into it. Those kinds of things of just how to do a typical rental that a city or a county should be able to regulate. And that bill was signed by the governor. So then we kind of move into the COVID period. So COVID period was, like I said, they came back after taking a pause in March, and the legislature came back to a completely different budget environment. They had to cut $3.3 billion out of the budget, which essentially means any bill that has some sort of financial cost is going to be on the chopping block potentially. The legislature was supposed to be fast, friendly, and free. I think we'd all disagree on whether or not they lived up to that standard, because I think there were some bills that they kind of put through their committee process. In Colorado, we have the Gallo rule, so every bill that's introduced has to go through a committee hearing. So some of those they've put through the committee and just immediately killed a whole bunch of bills, which some of that was pretty good for us. The inclusionary zoning that could open the door to rent control died. It forced the construction litigation reform bills, Senate Bill 93 and 138. Those also died because they were controversial. The other thing too is some of our HOA bills got modified. So, and Damien, chime in here whenever if there's relevant things I'm leaving out. But we had a couple of different HOA bills, and one of them was the HOA Information Center and Sunset. And the original form of the bill was pretty massive. It actually had this huge consumer dispute resolution process tied into it, which would have cost homeowners a lot of money to have to implement. Because I'm thinking none of you have ever had a disagreement with your HOA or don't know anyone who's had a problem with their HOA.
Or clients, for that matter, that had disagreements with HOAs.
Exactly. So you would have been required to take on this alternative dispute resolution process that could have gone all the way to the Attorney General, and that can be pretty expensive. So that part was stripped out of the bill, and then we're left with just continuing the HOA Information Center. So you can file a complaint, but essentially right now they actually don't really respond to your complaint because they don't have the staffing to be able to do that. So it's possible we see some sort of an HOA bill come back next year, because one of the other bills that died in this COVID kill-in committee form was 1333, and that dealt with HOA fee transparency, which I know has been a big issue for us and probably for you guys as well, just because sometimes they're really high, sometimes you can't get access to the documents with a huge cost. That issue will probably come back. I know we had some problems with that bill in the way it was structured and wanting to change some of it, but I don't know which form will come back in January, but some version of that probably is back. Anything else you want to add there, Damien?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, that dispute resolution process was a untried, unknown disaster is what it looked like to me, but I think you guys did a fantastic job of mitigating some damages there.
Yeah, we did get some of the arbitration bill amended before it died, but I think you'll see it come back. We'll see what form it comes back in. I think that's going to be a recurring theme of what we talk about today, things that are coming back in January. So the other thing that passed that is relevant to the real estate community is the home warranty sunset. So that program has proven to be very, very successful, and DORA agrees it's meeting its goals of what it was intended to do, and the governor signed that bill into law as well. So now I'll segue into that second legislative session that we were talking about, the COVID period. And putting aside all of the litigation around how they should or shouldn't come back and whether what they did was constitutional, because that happened as well. Once they came back, it was constitutional, and everything that they passed was going to become law and not be a subject to challenge. But normally we have 120 days of legislative session. And when we came back, they could have taken up to 55 days. And they basically had the entire second half of session in about 15 days. So you can imagine how many nights myself and other stakeholders and lobbyists were up until very late hours working these pieces of legislation from a distance too, because they were really discouraging people from coming to the Capitol. So the lobbying environment and the texting environment is pretty frenetic and fierce. But so that's why I say in all this environment, I think we were really successful in winning most of the challenges that we went up against, given all the obstacles that we had. So I kind of grouped the bills in this section into like two areas, the COVID emergency bills and then the regular bills that they decided to keep because they were a priority. So they remained. I'll start with the COVID bills. So first I would start with, let's start with the positive before I get to the negative. So 1410, which is, I guess, probably positive and negative ultimately, but what that did was allocate over $19 million in federal funding for rental and mortgage assistance. The good pieces of the bill were very clean. We were able to put into the legislation up to 100% AMI, so it wasn't really focused solely on low income assistance. It also does reach into that middle class, and it allows landlords to apply for the funding on behalf of their tenants. And I haven't pulled this up yet, but yesterday, the Department of Local Affairs was issuing guidance on how to apply for those funds. So definitely check out the Department of Local Affairs website. They're supposed to release that yesterday. The thing that is a little bit not as fun is the other side of the bill you never saw. So when the bill came up, it was just provided the federal pass-through for the funding. But around the time of the bill, there was this entire conversation around eviction moratoriums. The original version of the bill was 28 pages and included an eviction moratorium to 2024. Yeah, that's like 3 or 4 years there. So we took that 24-page bill, 28-page bill down to 8 pages. And that was the amendment that was supposed to get added into 1410. That was the clean version. So ultimately that amendment was never offered, but I think what we tried to do, and when we look at legislation at CAR, we tried to do our best to both build up relationships and make continuing partnerships, because we have to work with these people from one session to the next. But we also try to find the areas where we all agree. And I think for us, and I'm sure you would probably say this too, Damon, we wanted the shortest possible time frame when it comes to an eviction moratorium, because we honestly think property owners should be treated the same as renters. And when that federal forbearance period ends, it's property owners who could be more at risk in terms of not being covered. I don't know if you want to elaborate there, Damien.
Well, I actually thought you guys did a fantastic job with that bill, just because it was a tough one. And I don't want to make this sound like political, but to some degree, this session was political. We had one party in control of a lot of things, which in my mind is always a recipe for problems, regardless of which party it is. And it makes it so that they know they're going to pass something, or they feel like they can pass something because they always feel like they have the votes. And if you're not there giving guidance and helping them understand what the problems are, and helping them make amendments that make sense, and being their friend to help them find a bill, and you're just come out against stuff, you just don't make, you're not going to have a seat at the table. So the fact that you guys were able to have a seat at the table throughout this whole thing to get eventually what happened is it not passing was just incredible. But that's just my humble opinion from the sidelines. It was a tough session for a lot of different reasons. COVID, parties, what people were trying to, I mean, it was just, there were a lot of stuff that was tough for real estate.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm actually really proud of the fact that I think we came out of the legislative session with a better relationship with Governor Polis. And part of that is our advocacy work on making sure that realtors are essential, and continuing to advocate every step along the way as we've gone to, like, you know, I forget, shelter in place to protect our neighbors' vast outdoors. I mean, I don't know who gets to name these things, but I hope I get to do that in the next job. But
well, you know, and I know you're going to talk about this when you get to present, but you know, since we are on the subject of eviction, would you talk, you know, that bill didn't pass. I mean, obviously the eviction moratorium that was supposed to be in place, which was essentially you can't do anything. And I think it was October was the last deadline I had seen in the amendment. You know, and talk about what we got now with the governor's order, which is actually much more, in my opinion, balanced. Do you want to talk, or do you want to talk about that later? I don't mean to ruin your.
I can talk about that now. Happy to jump around. So yes, when the legislative session ended and there was no eviction moratorium amendment into 1410, then literally within a day or two, the governor issued his own extension of the moratorium that he had passed during the emergency time period before we went into this second part of session. And he literally matched it up with the federal act, so that mid-July timeframe. And we just saw him just last week or last weekend extend the notice period to August. And I've been telling the members that I talk to on a regular basis, we know what we're living through right now, but we don't necessarily know what's around the corner and how long could it get extended. I know because we've had conversations with the governor's office about the importance of the housing market, that he is very concerned about the home ownership and commercial property ownership being at risk. So if I was reading tea leaves, I don't know that it gets extended past October, but what I can't predict is what's going to happen between, you know, this new August period and September. And I wish I could have better certainty, but unfortunately, that's kind of the world we're all living in right now.
Yeah, and the new eviction bill actually doesn't say prohibition on evictions. It says you have to meet certain requirements and give a 30-day notice, and there's still a path at least to the courtroom, as opposed to the bill that died did not even have a path.
Right, yeah. I mean, we are, I think, in a different place than many other of our fellow states. There's a lot of them who have 6-month moratorium periods in place, and there's a lot of them who don't have a governor that is trying to sort of be down the middle and really deal with the business community, but also deal with the rental community. And I know I'm really concerned what happens in 6 months when all the employment runs out. So I think we're just gonna have to watch very closely, but I think we also have our courts more accessible than a lot of other states. There's a lot of states that have their courts completely closed and backlogs of evictions. I mean, I know we have a queue in our court system as well, but they haven't even started in several other states.
No. So I didn't mean to get you off topic, but I'll let you go back to your past presentation, but thanks.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So going back to the COVID emergency bills, one of the other bills that was dealt with property tax interest. So 1421 would delay, waive, or suspend, or at least give local governments the ability to do that, the interest on late payments for property taxes, which gives our property owners a little bit of relief. But it's up to your local government if they decide to do that. The other bill that we worked on is 207, and that is the unemployment insurance bill. So we kind of worked this in 2 different ways. We worked with the Department of Labor rulemaking and then the actual 207 bill. Both the rulemaking and the 207 bill, as originally contemplated, would have changed the definition of employer-employee in state law. Realtors have such a unique business model because, and real estate agents too, because oftentimes we have this concept of teams. And when you change the definition of if you control or manage a decision, it doesn't really line up with the way we operate, because if you're the managing or employing broker, that doesn't necessarily mean you're telling your team what to do. It means you share in the transaction, but so it didn't make sense. So they wanted to change the definition, and we said, no, you can't do that. It actually would completely change federal tax law that we are already exempted out of. So we got that stripped out of the bill, and the rulemaking is gone. They said, we don't want to even touch this if you guys have this. So that was another, I think, real successful point of our session.
Yeah, that would have been a big deal. If people had to withhold employment taxes for brokers, geez, that would have been bad.
Yeah. And speaking of taxes, good segue there. One of the bills that we really opposed and just came up kind of in the middle of the night was 1420. And in 1420, the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 allowed realtors and other independent LLCs, S-corps, sole proprietors, independent contractors, basically, to be able to take a tax deduction for a qualified business income. And what the state legislature wanted to do was decouple, meaning separate it out from the federal, so that you would essentially be forced to pay more taxes on the state level. And they set the threshold of when you would be kicked into paying more taxes at $75,000, which they said was the wealthy. I think I would beg to disagree. I think $75,000 a year really is the wealthy. And in fact, we really thought it would harm small businesses, especially our members. So we worked very hard and worked with the governor's office and did a call for action. But we got the bill amended from $75,000 threshold to $500,000 for single filers and $1 million for joint filers, which we think is much more appropriate to the aims of what they were targeting. I mean, yes, they're trying to fund education, but we think hurting small business to fund education doesn't make sense. So let's put it in the right range of what you're actually trying to do. Will we see taxes come up again? Yeah, I think it's going to come up. I think whether it's on your ballot or whether it's going to come back in November, January, we are going to see this increasing pressure because of the budget climate that we're in. This year we could do a bunch of one-time maneuvers. Next year we won't have that option, and the budget climate could be more difficult for our lawmakers to consider. So there's a couple more bills, and then we can start working on present and future.
You guys were busy.
So a couple of other bills that are huge wins for us that I think you guys will all appreciate. Remote notary. We finally, after 4 years, have permanent remote notary authorization. And Damien knows this was a big battle. And the final version protects consumer data. So we're very proud of that. It passed almost unanimously, 99 to 1. One person was absent that day, otherwise it would have been unanimous. Not that I'm counting, but the other bill that is a big deal for us, and I think this is probably something that a lot of folks don't know, 1155, it's a renewable energy bill dealing with new construction. So home builders would essentially have to offer to consumers the option of some energy efficient systems. What we wanted in the bill and what we added as an amendment was education to consumers about the difference between a solar lease and a solar purchase, because, and I know you all know this, I'm like preaching to the choir, but it ties up real estate transactions when it's harder to qualify for the solar panel than it is for the mortgage, which honestly makes no sense if we're trying to give people a real choice to choose energy efficiency. But the bill now requires the Department of Energy to be able to do that consumer education. So that's a huge win. We've been working on that for at least 7 years.
Wow.
That one is a big deal. I know that a lot of the people on this call, even I'm sure, have had problems with solar panel leases, or, you know, it comes up the 11th hour. So something in there that people hopefully know more about it when they choose it. At least they go in with some knowledge.
Yep. And then
real quick, I had a question for you on the remote notary. Did that have a safety clause in it? Is it effective immediately, or are we still waiting for it to go into effect? I don't know where that stands with the governor's order. And
you know, I think it has a safety clause, so it should be immediate. And the thing that I do know, the bill was crafted in a way to protect the notarizations that were done under the executive orders.
Oh, that's good.
Period. And then it goes on to require the Secretary of State to promulgate rules. And so you'll have this period that are approved under the executive orders, and then you'll have the period basically once the rulemaking comes out and is finalized. So everything is authorized throughout the whole period.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Because I know there was some question about whether or not the governor overstepped his reach with it the first time. So
yes, it was actually my very first remote bill signing when I got to watch from my computer as he signed a bill. So I'm sitting there filming it with my cell phone.
Nice. Okay, is that all you have any more past bills? I mean, it doesn't sound like you did anything this session.
I will just real quickly touch on some of the landlord tenant bills, and then I do want to get to some future and present. And honestly, our legislative review is up on the CAR website, so do go check that out, because I'm probably not going to get to every bill today.
I think you sent that to me before, and we'll have Jill send it out with the recording after the session is over, so that people can see if they have interest in some of the quick and dirty what happened.
Oh, perfect. So 3 kind of big landlord tenant bills, source of income, citizenship, and then I kind of grouped 1141, 1009, and 1405 together because they all kind of deal with fees and evictions. But source of income is going to add a class or source of income into the Fair Housing Act. The one thing that we did do with this bill, it was going to pass no matter what we did. Like Damien said before, unfortunately, the Democrats have the majority right now, so we have to play within the arena that we're dealt. So what we did was try to make the bill the least burdensome to our housing providers. And the first thing we did was make sure it wasn't applicable to homeownership, because we thought that didn't make any sense, because the buyer and seller should be able to choose. But then we amended the bill further to make sure if the federal government or HUD delays any processes, you as a housing provider aren't liable for that. We made sure you could do credit checks. We actually specifically spelled that out in the bill, that that's not a fair housing violation, so you won't be subject to litigation based on that. And then finally exempted a single family homes up to 5 units, so that you will not be forced to comply with that type of legislation for that. So the other thing, so that's 1332, and it was signed into law. 224 is citizenship. So again, we focused here on the credit check, and we made sure that you can use a social security number and a tax identification number. And that bill was also signed into law. And essentially, as a housing provider, you just have to treat all your tenants the same in your process. And then the last bills, 1141 and 1405 died in committee. One would have required you as the landlord to pay for the eviction process, and the defense of the tenant who decides that they shouldn't be evicted, which I think we can all agree doesn't make sense for you to pay for you to be taken to court. And then 1009 allows us to seal evictions. And I think most of the stakeholders involved in that bill agreed that if you haven't had an actual ruling from the court, you shouldn't be listed as having an eviction on your record until it's final. Once it's final, then that can be publicized. And 1141, the fee bill, short story with that, it died in committee, but it's probably coming back next year.
That's the one where the fees for having to pay for evictions, or?
This is the one about late fees and whether or not you can use your security deposit to pay the late fees.
Okay.
You know, pets fees, it covers all sorts of fees, but we're gonna see a new version of that. So I'm not gonna spend too much time on it today, since we'll see another version next year.
Oh, good.
Sorry, I know I'm the bearer of bad news.
Well, you got some good ones in there. So yeah. We'll let it pass this time. Before you go on, there was a question. Have you gotten clarification on the 5 exempt and how it relates to property management is the question.
Yes. So we have heard back from our legal counsel that as we thought the bill was drafted, it's sort of narrowly targeted to one section of the bill. So the exemptions only apply to those particular sections. I believe it's 1 and 1.7 in the bill for anyone who's keeping track, but there's a definition of landlord that they make for those exemptions. It only applies to those sections. The rest of the bill uses the general term of landlord. So we do have clarity on that.
Okay, so property managers are going to have to be careful still.
I mean, I think our property managers are going to have to understand the rules, but I think it's not going to be as restrictive as maybe we had thought it would be.
Okay, great. So what else you got for us?
Well, I mean, I think let's segue into the present so I don't spend the whole time on the past.
Well, yeah, and this really is going to be a whole bunch of stuff about governor orders, because you guys, like you said, you've been working closely with the governor on a whole bunch of different things. So your job hasn't just been lobbying with the legislature, it's been actually working with the governor's office, trying to make things make sense with for real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, between, and I'm very fortunate, I know you guys all know Scott Peterson, our general counsel, but
He's not very good. He's not nearly as smart as you.
I'm gonna tell him you said that. No, seriously though, they worked on getting a COVID addendum that I think has been pretty highly used throughout this entire period. We also, before I mentioned remote notary, we asked for these executive orders to be extended. Basically, every time it was about to expire, we'd ask for 60 days, 90 days for it to keep continuing until we got permanent authorization. And then we had the whole period of, well, okay, now we're going into shelter in place and everyone's gonna have to stay at home. So it was a flurry to make sure that we were declared essential. And at first we weren't. Within 24 hours, myself and our lobbyist got real estate declared essential and got that order amended so that all of you can continue to operate your businesses. And then we kind of went into the period of showings and what is part of the real estate transaction. I know you guys all know we view it so broadly. It should be photography, staging, furniture, you know, the inspection, which we're still working on getting home inspectors licensed. That's on the to-do list still, but that's a topic for another day. So we finally did end up getting clarity around showings. It just took us a lot of back and forth with DORA, the Division of Real Estate, and the governor's office. And I think he now probably understands real estate maybe better than he ever has due to the conversations we've been having with his office. And when we went to, oh, the name's right, Protect Our Neighbors, that is now in this variance, which I'll get into in a second, but we first wanted to make sure open houses were allowed as part of that, and following the safety restrictions, following the number of people with the new social distancing calculator, but we advocated for increasing it to open houses as well, because that is a big part of business, especially for our newer brokers.
Yeah, that's been a big deal. So anything else we got coming that's present?
Yeah, so I think what you're going to see with this Protect Our Neighbors is that it's going to vary county by county. It's not always fun when we basically cross one jurisdictional line and the rules could be different, but up until literally today, our governor was not making statewide rules when it comes to how you should operate. So actually late breaking news today, the governor today announced there's a statewide mask mandate for all indoor meetings, which would cover most of a real estate transaction. So that will be the law of the land until we get a better COVID situation. Our cases are rising, just like several other places across the country. Ours aren't near as bad as Arizona and Texas and Florida, but we are noticing that uptick. So he today announced that statewide mask mandate.
Yeah, that just came out today, right? It's statewide, and he had wanted to do that for months. He's been trying to stay away from that. Any idea why, or just because of raising cases, or?
I think it's probably a combination of the rise in cases, but also local leaders wanting that kind of clarity. When he made the announcement today, he actually had Mayor Hancock and Mayor Kaufman of Aurora standing with him. I know our slope, our Eastern Plains and Western Slope and metro area are all very, very different in their experiences, but the mask mandate, he also had the epidemiologist there with him. So one of the things, I think you may agree or disagree with me on this, but the government has tried to make decisions based on data. And when the data shows that the cases are rising, or there is a way for us to be more protective of our population just by wearing masks, which is what the data shows, I think the governor is trying to err on the side of how can we get our economy back functioning quicker? And one of those ways is to require wearing masks.
And you say that's for indoor use only. This isn't if you're outside going for a jog or walking your pet or something. It's indoor, which I think the open houses were required anyways, but this just makes it across the board, period.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you were doing an open house, you still had to wear your mask and clean before and after a person went through. So it's not going to change too much in terms of how we operate in real estate transactions because we were already doing this. But I guess if you walked outside, you could maybe take your mask off, but you'd have to put it back on right when you go inside. Yeah, it is only for indoor. I mean, a lot of our state likes to recreate outside, and I think our governor's trying to continue to allow us to have a sane opportunity to take a walk with our loved ones or just get outside for exercise.
Makes sense. So you were going to talk about the protect our neighbors because we've heard a lot about that. What's your crystal ball say?
Well, I was expecting protect our neighbors to be a statewide order, but when he released it, he actually said every local jurisdiction needs to apply for that protect our neighbors. So I do think you're going to see a patchwork and you have to submit your plan. So that means we as brokers and practitioners need to pay attention to our county health departments and those same folks we are looking to for the essential orders about what are our operating procedures. And we want to be the good example. We want to be the ones out there doing the right thing. And we all know the market is doing pretty well. It could be one of the sources of economic recovery, but we're going to have to keep a close eye on it.
Okay, so this is going to be at the local level. You don't foresee anything coming from the governor as a governor order at the conclusion of Safer at Home and the Vast Great Outdoors at the end of this month? Or I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to be talking about come August 6th. As you can imagine.
Oh man, you want me to do your homework?
Yes, please.
Well, honestly, I really think the data is going to drive where we go. So if this mask mandate is very effective at reducing some of our cases, we might actually see a broader order. But I think, if I remember right, the last time I heard him speak, there's something about somewhere between 5 and 10 days between the data from one instance that is a delay. So I think you'll see a little bit of data pushing the decision, and it may not line up exactly with the end of the month. It'll depend on where the data takes us.
Okay. Well, I know that, do you have anything else in present? I know future, I kind of want to know what you're going to see, what you think as far as legislative, but if you got something else on the governor or anything else, I'll let you hit on that first. I don't know.
No, I think I hit most of my present. We already told you the breaking news today.
Yes. Okay, so what do you see in your tea leaves for next legislative session? What do you think? Oh, and you have there's something that's coming up on I think we have something coming up on, in the election, don't we? That's going to be a ballot initiative.
Yeah, actually, there's going to be potentially a lot of interesting things on your ballot. But in terms of real estate, Gallagher repeal was referred by the legislature. Whether you agree or disagree, there was a bill in the legislature that freezes the rates in place for commercial and residential. So commercial's 29% and residential's 7%. It's a little unclear if this legislature can bind the next one. So it's really uncertain if the Gallagher repeal will pass at the ballot box. It basically pulls the ratio, the 45% to 55% ratio that's one of our constitutional formulas, out of the Constitution.
You may need to back up and kind of explain this a little bit, Liz, because I'm sure that there's some people wondering what you're talking about right now.
Okay, I can do that. I am not, Gallagher is one of those, what we call Gordian knots. Essentially, in the early 90s, a state legislator decided that we needed to connect the residential property tax rate to the commercial property tax rate so that, the plan was essentially if one goes up, they kind of stay at the same, or no one goes higher or lower. But what's happened over time, unfortunately, and it's kind of one of those weird quirks of the economy that no one really predicted, right? our home values went up so fast that then required the property taxes to go down, whereas commercial,
like the residential property taxes to go down.
Right, residential.
Okay.
And the commercial, kind of the opposite happened. So whenever the residential would go down, commercial would go up to fit this ratio that was in the constitutional formula. So right now, the reason it was referred by the legislature to the voters is what gets funded in property taxes: schools, local governments, your fire protection district. And if it's the property tax assessor is forecasting that both commercial and residential property taxes are going to go down unless this Gallagher amendment repeal and this freeze can hold. And so the question for voters is, would I like my taxes to go down, or would I like to pull out the formula out of the Constitution? And that's a pretty tough question for a lot of voters.
Yeah. Yeah, and have my taxes go up by virtue of pulling this constitutional protection out.
Yeah, and the unintended consequences of what will the next legislature do? Like, could they on their own volition decide to raise taxes on either commercial or residential? I think that's an unclear picture.
Well, that'll be fun. Has Carr had a position on this one, or are you just kind of monitoring it?
You know, we ended up monitoring both the moratorium or the freeze and Gallagher. And honestly, it was because we recognize that our commercial and business property owners are hurting from the high tax rates that they have. And I know it'd be nice to lower that burden on them. But we at the same time realize our residential property owners are having your taxes go up is nothing that anybody would like. And we still have an affordable housing problem here. So every $50 that you raise in property taxes could increase the life of your loan by 12 to 18 months and decrease your buying power as a new first-time home buyer by 11 or 12,000. So it's not a simple thing for the housing market to change the property tax scheme.
Yeah, it has impacts one way or the other, both directions.
Right.
Okay, so what do you expect in the next legislative session?
Oh, well, if Gallagher does fail at the ballot box, there could be alternatives proposed in January of what should do. That's one. Also, we're going to see proposals to increase taxes regardless, because we need to find a way to fix our budget deficit. I think you're going to see increasing pressures on affordable housing, whether that's inclusionary zoning. I hope from our perspective that we can work in the off season on some creative alternatives to what do we do to reduce or eliminate some of the regulatory barriers so that we can actually build more, because we have a huge supply issue. So the way to actually get to affordable housing, we think, is really by building more affordable products, because we're going to need it, especially in this period when so many folks may not be able to pay their rent, or people are behind because they had their mortgage forbeared in this COVID period. So, and we'll watch out for foreclosures. I mean, it's crazy to think that we're back in this place that we were in 2008, 2009, but I'm really worried to see where that goes in terms of legislative solutions.
Exactly.
And then one other thing too, sorry, Damien.
No, go ahead.
One bill that we really liked last legislative session that we'll be working to bring back is a bill on financial literacy, which I think is going to be really critical for a lot of our population. But this is actually high school curriculum that would focus on consumer debt, student loans, and actually being prepared to buy a house. Are you doing the right things to get your finances in order? So that could be a good thing that comes next session.
Nice. Well, I know we have one question up there. Jill, do we have any other questions? Or I guess people should put them in if they would like to ask some questions.
Let's see, there was a question here. Some showings are requiring gloves. With the debate of effectiveness of gloves versus sanitizing surfaces, has the governor or legislature come out with gloves not being helpful?
Well, I know the legislature hasn't addressed gloves directly, and that's really more in the governor's domain under his emergency powers. But most of the time, I don't think he's gone down to the specifics of you should wear gloves or not. I think he's weighed into the don't serve food or drink at your public meeting. But I would actually lean into that question to look at the public health authorities guidance in your local jurisdiction, because I think they're going to probably be a lot more detailed in how they tackle that. But I will just double check and see if I can research that and see if the governor's made any mention of that, but I'm not aware of anything on gloves particularly.
Yeah, I don't know if the governor has said anything, but I know that like DORA has, and the Division of Real Estate has said that they recommend, and for some reason, gloves got in as something that everybody's recommend. I'll tell you, as a real estate broker, I would just have your gloves present and make them available just to make sure that you met whatever our regulator is saying. But I don't know of anything that actually requires it, but there's this weird ambiguous stuff in the FAQs that talks about how you should do them.
Right.
So.
There was a comment in the chat on metro districts. So I will say metro districts and special districts, that is going to come back. There was all last legislative session discussion about the transparency around these, especially after the Denver Post article. So that legislation will most likely come back in January. And this particular issue about junior liens and certificates, my guess is we see some sort of comprehensive bill that tries to address that in January. It's been a particular focus of Representative Weissman's. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays in, because when we talk about the property taxes, the fluctuating mill levies, the metro districts and special districts and the property taxes, it's this whole group of taxes that are not really transparent to homeowners about how much they're paying. And I think you're going to see a pretty broad conversation with all those kind of getting wrapped in together.
Any others, honey?
I'm not seeing any other questions out there. Feel free to ask.
And if not, we'll wrap up a little early.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can't leave you with too much doom and gloom. I mean, there's a lot of silver lining and a lot of hard work, but I think the way I'd sum up where we are and where we're going is, good job. We did a ton of hard work and I'm exhausted, but rest now, because when we get to January, I think we're going to have a lot of obstacles. And, you know, we need your voice. So to be honest, you giving us the opportunity to talk to you about what we're doing or bringing up issues that you're seeing out there as you have transactions, it's so critical that we can share those with policymakers, because they need to understand the practical implications of what they're doing at the legislature and how real estate works.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Liz, thank you so much, not only for your time today, but for all your time and efforts to be such a tremendous advocate for the real estate industry. We all benefit from what you do. Thank you for giving up all those nights of sleep and for all the stress. And it really is extraordinary what you and your team have done. And so thank you for that.